Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. Welcome back to Cyber Voices. It's me, David Willett, and today we're diving into some of the most critical conversations in our industry: diversity, leadership, and innovation in cybersecurity. Joining me today is the fabulous Dr. Susan McGinty, CEO and founder of the Asstembly and IA Leadership, an award-winning scientist, global STEM and security leadership expert, and a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion. She has been recognized as a Women Leading Tech Champion of Change and a Women in STEM Leader of the Year. Susan recently authored the white paper Advancing the Cybersecurity Sector, which lays out a bold roadmap for building a more inclusive and innovative cyber workforce. Susan, welcome to Cyber Voices.
Thank you, David. Look, I've been listening to the show and I'm very excited to be able to contribute a different perspective, perhaps a different voice to the podcast series. So thank you so much for having me.
No, you're very, very welcome. And you've got a lot on the go. So I am very excited that you were able to squeeze us in and share your unique perspectives as well. So you started as a scientist. You have a PhD in medical chemistry. I tell you that like you don't know it. So what's inspired your shift into leadership development and advocacy for diversity in STEM and cybersecurity?
Well, that time in my life, the science research part of my career seems like a lifetime ago, and it's actually coming up to almost 20 years ago. So it really has been quite an evolution, but a really organic evolution. So I always loved science as a child. I was really curious, wanted to know the why about everything. Science seemed like a natural place for me to put my career. So I studied medicinal chemistry, drug design at the undergraduate level, and then I loved research so much that I moved into the postgraduate level. And so the science researcher was kind of what I defined myself as, what I thought my future would be. And I really thought that being able to contribute to, new drugs, new drug development to help society was kind of the pinnacle of what I could achieve. But I found along the way in that research career that it was a bit challenging. It was a bit challenging for women, particularly to advance their careers. I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any sponsors, very few female role models. And in fact, the model that was presented to both myself and the other women around me in science research was really that you either have a family and stop working and take a massive break in your career and pause your career for sort of, 10 years until your children don't need you as much anymore. Or you put off having a family to kind of solidify your career opportunities. And that was a little bit confronting for me. And so when I sort of did start having children around 30, I had to leave jobs because the job wouldn't support me working part-time as a new parent. Lots of systemic gender discrimination that was just built into the system that I couldn't really navigate very well. But I saw some great opportunities to use my specialist technical skill sets in the Department of Defence. So I moved into national security, taking with me everything I'd learned from my research career and learning how to apply that in a different way. I had quite a lot of autonomy in all the roles I did to be innovative and creative and start to learn about leadership. I looked around me and saw that lots of people weren't doing it well. And as I learned more about it, I really started to become quite fascinated with it, as fascinated as I had been with science. And I really started to see it as another sort of technical skill set that people needed in order to bring their technical expertise to light and to allow it to have impact. I also saw around me the women, particularly the science and tech women that were working for me, working alongside me, really feeling like they didn't feel like they had career options that aligned with A, their potential, B, their desires. And they really felt limited because they didn't have the leadership development element. I sort of supported lots of women along the way for a number of years and finally I got a bit frustrated and fed up And I thought, well, someone's actually got to develop something that's going to help women in the security sector, the STEM sector, to learn how to be leaders, because the leadership diversity numbers are not moving. In my organisation, we couldn't really get past 30%. In many other organisations, it was much lower. And that was, that was 12 years ago, 13 years ago. It really hasn't moved much since then. So I started with a pilot leadership development program with 10 women in the STEM security sector, and we grew from there.
It's amazing to think that even 12 or 15 years ago, however long it was, that you still found a struggle in wanting to both have a family and a career at the same time. You mentioned the program you started with 10 women. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so they were 10 women who I largely at the intersection of STEM and national security. And I really thought about, okay, what are all the leadership skills that I've learned in particularly the last 5 years of my career, that I know I need at my level and at various levels to do the job I need to do, to influence, to communicate, to build teams and make sure they're high performing and resilient, to help them be adaptive. How do I give these women the skill sets to be able to anticipate the future and put that future into practice for their organizations, make really good decisions? But also, how do I help them to become the leader that they want to be, that's authentic with who they are in a male-dominated environment? And so one of the biggest challenges for all women that I speak with in the security and STEM sectors is at a couple of different levels. At the emerging leader level, they don't have the confidence to even think about a leadership role because they don't have the female role models. So they don't see how their skill sets and their way of thinking and working and their values could possibly align with the role of leader they see men taking on. But even as they move up into, they're already a team leader, they're already, a director, they still haven't quite figured out how to confidently be the leader that is authentically them versus being the leader that they think others want to see, because they've got these masculine role models of leadership. And so really kind of starting with helping them identify who they are as people, who they want to be as leaders, what their strengths are, their values are, and how to really build a mindset of leadership around who they are, what their life story is, what their responsibilities are as a parent, for example, and all the different experiences in their life that make up who they are each day. That was a foundational part of it. And that's been really critical in achieving the impact that we see from the range of programs that we provide women in security and STEM now.
Can you dive a little bit more into the importance of that mentoring and how that's helping to break the more masculine or traditionally masculine role models that we have in leadership? But I'm also interested in your advice as well. How can men also adapt and to make sure that there is balance in the examples that they are providing to people in the industry from a leadership perspective?
Mentoring is really critical for women to develop leadership skills. It's actually a fundamental protective factor that helps them to navigate some of the challenges that can exist being in male-dominated industries like security and STEM. And there's research that supports that. And mentoring has a number of benefits. Particularly for women, it gives them opportunities to learn from other people who have already been there and done that, develop skill sets in a really specific, targeted way, set goals for themselves, right? So start to think about and develop the future self that they want to be. But it also gives them access, if they have female mentors, to female role models. And that's critical because it shows them the different ways that people might think about leadership or tackle problems or problem solve or think about developing skills in different ways. And I think, there's women and men think differently. We do that because our brains are different and we lead differently. And that's because our brains are different, and that's a good thing. And so I'd really encourage, women at all levels to have male role models and mentors as well. It doesn't matter so much who your role model is as long as they're a great leader. I know as we're transitioning to the Asstembly, our focus has it's expanded rather. It's evolved from diverse leadership to inclusive leadership. So from inclusion perspective, I think some of the things that you and others can do is really just acknowledging that there are different ways to achieve the same outcome. There's different ways to approach the same problem. And really just fundamentally is building the psychological safety that will enable all people to feel safe in raising their questions, their ideas, their concerns. Because what often happens is that for people who might be minorities in a team, whether that's gender, cultural minority, if they don't feel psychologically safe, they won't raise their ideas or their questions. And so potentially you're missing out on this incredible innovation opportunity, or you're making the wrong decision, or you're not really following a data blip.
You mentioned the Asstembly there. So the Asstembly, listeners, is about to launch at the time of recording, which Susan very proudly told me before we hit the record button. By the time you're listening to this, it will be out there. So what is the core mission behind IR Leadership and the Asstembly, and why is this work so important right now?
IR Leadership was born out of that really strong mission for me to uplift women into leadership roles, to help them fulfill their own leadership potential, and really driven by a vision of 50% female representation in leadership at all levels, not just at C-suite levels, but at all levels across the security and STEM professions. I think that's really vital. And as we've been focused on female leadership development, we've seen the market change over the last sort of 5-6 years as technology's changed, as we've moved faster, as there's more urgency with dealing with some of society's biggest problems, but also how we're managing things like cybersecurity, AI governance. And so we saw a much greater need for diversity in innovation. We also started having our clients asking us for support and leadership development outside of just female leadership development. So they wanted us to start developing, their men as well, focusing on specific skill sets, uplifting their leadership. We focus on leadership excellence as well. So we've been doing that for a couple of years, but I really came to understand that with sort of the change in the world and learning more about diversity and inclusion and the research around the role of inclusion to enabling diversity, we really wanted to evolve to focus not just on female leadership development and uplifting women into leadership roles, but really embedding inclusive leadership at the core of innovation. There's plenty of research to support it. We know, for example, that companies can generate 19% higher revenue from innovation when they have inclusive cultures. We know that there's a 30% improvement in identifying mitigating business risks when there's an inclusive culture, when there is inclusive leadership in place. We know there's lower staff turnover rates. We know there's more revenue generated for every employee. They're just a few statistics, but inclusive culture comes from inclusive leadership. And so we've spent quite a bit of time developing some systems-based frameworks for leaders and organizations to really embed inclusion at the core of their business, and not just the workforce, but how they run their business.
A small anecdote I would like to share with you on that is in my former role, I had a large team, but I very much struggled with trying to attract more gender diversity into the team. I had an amazing woman come in who was my leader in that role, who was a fantastic role model, but she challenged me so much she goes, your team is fabulous, but what do you think? There's something that's missing from it, right? If you put us all in a room together, there was certainly something that was noticeable. And I will admit, at that point in time, the women that we did have in the team were in some of the more junior roles. When I lent into bringing in more women into my leadership team, because I had a leadership team and then about 30 odd people underneath all of that, I really lent into the challenge that I was given by my leader at the point to try and get it to 50-50. And we did. In fact, by the time I left, it was actually more women than there was men. But I'll never forget the impact that had at both levels, because we still started attracting more women into junior roles through grad programs and internships. But I really feel that they flourished and thrived and had that psychological safety that you're talking about because we had such amazing women in the leadership team who they could feel safe with, and they started their own groups together, supporting each other, going to AWSN events and other stuff like that together. And I can remember just kind of like sitting back going like, oh, I'm almost kind of jealous I'm not part of your club, but I also love it at the same time as well, because you're doing amazing things. So
it's a fabulous example, David. And in the white paper I wrote last year, Advancing the Cybersecurity Sector, really focused on diversity and inclusion, how to build that diverse and inclusive workforce across the sector. And one of the core things I focused on unpacking for the reader was exactly what you just said. When we have more women in leadership roles, it changes the culture of the team because women think differently, and women and men together think so well when you combine their different strengths. And I think that's a balanced team and balanced leadership representation is much more effective than all women or all men because of how we bring our brains together and how we think and work.
And your white paper highlights as well the stat that still blows me away to this day, because I feel like we've been talking about this stat for a while and I just don't understand why it's not moving. And that's the fact that 17% of Australia's cybersecurity workforce is made up of women, which I think for everything we just talked about, it will continue to hurt the future success of the industry. But another question I wanted to ask you, though, about your paper was, including that statistic, what really surprised you the most when you were researching and writing that paper?
The paper that I wrote was intended to put the research that RMIT and AWSN did together in 2023. I think it was called Gender Dimensions of the Australian Cybersecurity Sector. That's where the 17% statistic comes from, their research. They had some other incredibly informative research. I wanted to take that research and tell cybersecurity organisations in Australia what they could do to put into practice some of the recommendations from the research and how they could start to practically and reliably build diversity in their workforces. But what did surprise me in that body of research from RMIT University was actually, if you then looked in that 17% of women, less than 10% were senior leaders. So we're talking about less than 2% of the Australian cybersecurity workforce being senior leaders who are female. And within that 17%, only 8 to 9% had access to any type of leadership development or career development opportunity like mentoring or some kind of leadership development training. That really bothered me. And the other thing I kind of came to understand, both from the RMIT research, but as I started to write my white paper, is that there's still, at that point in time, was a real lack of understanding and commitment around the value of diversity and the value of having women in the cybersecurity sector. There just seemed to be, from all the industry people that I spoke to, and it ranged, right? It varied, but there was such a significant lack of understanding around the value of having women in the sector and bringing them into either your workforce at all, or thinking about, okay, I've got one woman in my small organisation of 20, and not being aware that actually that needs to build and you need to support that woman and get more women in, otherwise you're going to lose her. So that real lack of understanding of the impact of the lack of diversity on outputs, innovation outputs, did surprise me. The other thing I kind of learned, though, and this was a real plus, is that cybersecurity sector is so fast-paced. It changes. It's able to change so quickly because it's got to keep up with the threat environment. It's so adaptable. I think that it has an opportunity that other elements of the STEM sector don't have to really be quite adaptive in how they're starting to think about diversity and inclusion.
And you mentioned there as well that it was surprising that there were people who still didn't understand why they needed inclusion or why they needed diversity. And It's sad. I've still speak to people myself in recent years who, and men who tout that line of like, oh, but shouldn't we just do it based on merit and who's the right person for the job? And I've had to call people out on that before and say, yeah, but do you think maybe you have got an unconscious bias on what you think is the appropriate merit for the job? But then they might go, oh, but women just don't apply for the roles. I'm like, well, why is that? Like, why? Like, how? That's because I personally found once I started building a more diverse and inclusive team and started working with the recruiters on different strategies to attract more women into the team, that I was getting a pretty even balance.
Yeah.
And I can tell you there was merit all round in the people.
Absolutely. And we've developed some really robust and scientific frameworks in the Asstembly related to inclusion, building inclusive leadership, building inclusive culture, putting inclusion strategies into place. And what they do that we weren't able to do in our leadership through our focus on diversity only is they really start to think about, okay, how do we start to tackle and work with those biases that we all have, that all organisations have, and how do we start to change mindsets a little bit or take into account the biases that we come along with, the strategies, the policies, the processes, and specific learning specific behaviours that align with inclusion.
I wonder if you're talking there about the pathway to leadership diversity framework that you've introduced. Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah, I can. So I was actually just then I was referring to inclusive culture systems framework. However, in the white paper, yes, we do have this pathway to leadership diversity framework, which we will continue to use in the Asstembly because it's science-based, it's foundational, it's effective. So we talk about being able to engineer, shape a pathway to leadership diversity that allows not just women, but just diverse people. So gender diversity, cultural diversity, diversity of background and experience. So we've developed a framework, a pathway that consists of 4 elements, really, 4 stages that really helps, and it's based on research relating to women, helps women to advance in leadership in a very structured way that puts the emphasis for responsibility and accountability not on the individual woman, but on the organisation. So it gives organisations a blueprint, a roadmap, if you like. So 4 stages, 4 phases. The first one is implementing tailored leadership development. Now, tailored leadership development for women in the security and STEM sector is important because it's different type of development than what men need. It's different to what other sectors might need. So we've built leadership development blueprints specifically tailored for women in those sectors. And that leadership development implementation needs to be provided to women at all levels, not just senior leaders, but actually I'm a real firm believer in supporting women's leadership development at the earliest levels. So we do a lot of work with emerging leaders. The next phase is to augment that leadership training with role models, mentors, and networks. And role models, mentors, and networks are all really very critical enablers to supporting that development. Showing women what opportunities they might have, helping them learn about different sectors, all the things you get from mentoring, networking, and having role models, both male and female. Step 3, phase 3, is we call accelerate. So it's really about accelerating women into leadership roles through sponsoring them. So organisations sponsoring the women in their organisations and giving them experiential development opportunities. And those experiential development opportunities could be anything from giving them a stretch assignment to run a new project, giving them an opportunity to work above level, a stretch assignment, giving them an opportunity to job shadow somebody for a week or even a day, whatever it is, depending on their particular role and skill set, but also their development requirements and where they want to take their career. But that accelerate phase is critical because otherwise you're not giving them the opportunity to put what they're learning into practice and prove that they can do it. And of course, we know that we learn much more effectively through experience than through theory. The final phase is embed. So organizations need to embed the leadership development of their women and their career progression through career planning. So the embed phase is all about career planning. And career planning should apply to everyone in the organization, not just women, but in order to make it equitable, apply it to everybody, and that will include the women. So, yeah, look, there's some very important elements that underpin the success of that framework, and particularly leadership development for women needs to be part of a structured and systemic change. You can't just say, right over here, we're going to put on a leadership development program, but we're not going to do anything else, because that won't work. That will disenfranchise the women and they'll leave. And it's got to be underpinned by allocated resources, so funding, people to support. It's got to be underpinned by structured opportunities that will enable the networking, the mentoring, the experiential opportunities, the sponsorship. There's got to be investment from senior leaders. There has to be support processes. And most importantly, there's got to be accountability measures and transparency. Got to be kind of measuring the impact and ensuring that what they're doing is right for their organisation.
And it's a journey as well, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's not going to happen overnight. Like that may sound quite daunting to some people, but like you lean into it and make it your North Star, and one day you'll wake up and you'll realize that actually the whole makeup of your team and your organization has changed, and you'll feel it. You'll definitely feel it. Absolutely.
And look, I say to every organization that I work with, you're unique. You've got a different workforce, a different purpose, and a different business strategy to any other organization. You're at a different place in your inclusion journey. So let's start there. And so whilst we've got, blueprints and frameworks and systems that we share with organizations and help them put into practice, we start with where they are in their current experience. Something that I advocate for is for organizations to set themselves a goal of increasing the representation of women in leadership at all levels just by 10%, 10% each year. If you increase by 10% each year, you'll be surprised how quickly you can get to whatever your overall goal is, that's hopefully close to 50% gender representation in your leadership at all levels.
Take the cliche marathon, not a sprint kind of example.
Yeah.
Because I've literally been in organizations before where people have been talking about wanting to improve that diversity, and then people go, "Oh, so what? Are we going to sack half the men and replace them with women?" And like, no one would ever do that. That is a ridiculous thing to say. I think when you put it like that, it makes a lot more sense. Because again, why would anyone do that other thing that I just said?
Yeah, exactly. And so for some organizations, okay, say you're a 50-person organization, you're a small to medium organization, 50 people. You might have 17% women. Let's call it 20, so the maths is easy. You've got 10 women. Increasing, now they won't all be in leadership roles, but if you've currently got like one in leadership role, out of those, or let's say you've got, 10% of the leadership, that's 5 women, increasing that by 10% is only half a woman a year. Well, let's go up and say, well, let's go from 5 to 6. And then the next year, let's go from 6 to 7. And then you might go, well, we're going to go 7. Because as you're increasing the number of women in the leadership roles, you're changing the culture that's more inviting and motivating and engaging for women to be part of. There's some very interesting research, David, that indicates that women perceive they have less power in a leadership group that is less than 50% women. And that puts them off joining the leadership group, whether that's a committee or a team or going for promotion, whatever that might be. When a woman sees that the leadership group that she potentially wants to join is 50% women or more, her perception of the power she can have, the influence she can have in that group is such that she is motivated to join the group. So she perceives she has more power, more influence, will be more welcomed and valued and more able to contribute and have her voice heard in a group that is at least 50% women or close to 50% women. And so the fact that leadership teams aren't 50% women, and of course we need the women in the organisations to fill that, but it is actually limiting and creating this kind of perpetual cycle of more men than women. And so that's something that I wouldn't have known unless I'd read the research.
Imagine being the only different voice at the table and having to speak 10 times as loud to be heard. That's hard, right? And that can lead to all kinds of things, right? We could be looking at overstress, burnout, and then eventual disassociation and disengagement from that job and that industry. And that's something else that I've heard. We've brought other people in on this podcast to talk about this topic. We lean into it a lot because it's so important for cyber at the moment. That's one of the reasons potentially, it's a hypothesis why that 17% number has not changed in very, very much in 2 years, is because I have heard people talk about there is just this attrition happening because there are women who are in these roles who are going, I'm exhausted by this and I'm giving up, which I totally get. Like, I totally get it. It's not right, but I do totally get it. And I've even had conversations with women I know in the industry who have flirted with the idea for those very reasons, which is unfortunate. It's really unfortunate.
So one of the key things that we work on with women in all our leadership programs is emotional intelligence, but also personal resilience. Now, some of our programs we work on like team resilience and building organizational resilience as well, but particularly at all levels, we work on personal resilience and we look at how to support yourself, think about setting your own boundaries, looking after yourself, thinking about how you avoid burnout, how you understand the challenges that you're facing and navigate them, but how you do that through a resilience lens, not a bounce back or burnout or responsive lens. And look, we've been partnering with the AWSN since 2022 to deliver the Women in Security Emerging Leaders program. Last year, we won the Women in Security Award for Best Diversity, Inclusion and Equity program, which was fabulous. But all the women, we put over 120 or 140 women through that program, specifically with the AWSN, and they've all just come out with this much stronger ability to navigate the challenges in a realistic way. And, a lot of them do work in SOCs and they work in very stressful environments. So we're giving them the tools to be able to manage that. Now, of course, as you go up the leadership ladder, that stress, particularly if you're only one woman around the table, that exacerbates. And so it's really important that at all leadership levels, women have to be investing in their personal resilience. And I think resilience can get a bad rap. I think during COVID it became such an overused word that people decided they weren't going to engage with resilience. But actually it's fundamental. And I know Cyber Minds is doing a lot of work on, approaching burnout from one perspective. And we're really approaching burnout from a different perspective, which is building these personal resilience enablers.
We've talked a lot about that long game, but someone could be listening to this episode who wants to make a meaningful, practical step starting today or starting tomorrow to improve diversity. What advice would you give them?
I think the first thing to do is just do yourself a quick diversity audit. If you've got a HR team, get them to do it if they haven't already. Any organization that's sort of 100 or more and has to report to WGEA, they've probably got processes in place. But there's lots of organizations that are much smaller. Do a quick diversity audit. Where do I have diversity in my organization? In all types of diversity. But I think then the first thing to do is just make sure you're creating psychological safety and you're creating the environment for diversity to survive. Because if you're wanting to build more diversity, then you've got to have a diverse, friendly environment and workplace for them. And inclusion is at the core of that. But if you have any women in your organization, absolutely start investing in their leadership development. Because even if you don't see a leadership role for them right now, leadership development is actually a retention tool. There's research to show that it's a retention tool for women in STEM and other technical professions. So at the very least, you're going to be retaining them. You're going to be uplifting and up-leveling their skill sets, their ability to communicate, influence, and I think they're the two most important things that somebody could do.
And this will be the final one. So for any women aspiring to leadership roles in cybersecurity or organizations that want to become market leaders through diversity, how can they get more involved with the work that you're doing?
Women can get involved by participating in any of our leadership programs. So we have tailored leadership programs at the emerging leader level, that sort of early career level where women are transitioning from perhaps being an expert to their first leadership role, whether that's a team leader or even an informal leader. There's a lot of informal leaders out there that potentially they're doing a lot of leadership. They're not necessarily recognized as leaders because they might not have the title of a manager. Of course, leaders and managers are different, but then we've got a program for established leaders as well. We work with sort of senior level and C-suite women on a one-on-one basis, and there's lots of work we do with them there. But then from an organisational perspective, absolutely get involved with some of the work we're doing at the Asstembly. We have inclusive leadership programs, we have leadership excellence programs, and we have inclusive culture strategies that we can help you with.
Amazing. Well, Susan, I'll collect a whole bunch of links and resources off you to include in the episode description. So please make sure that you have a browse through those. Listeners, this has been a really fantastic conversation and exploration into how we can continue to address the opportunities of diversity and inclusion in cybersecurity. And that's really what they are. They are opportunities in how we can make sure that our very important and critical industry, especially right now, continues to thrive with the voices and thoughts and problem solvers of a broad variety of people, not just one particular part of our human civilization. This is a great episode to share with anyone who you know who maybe still can't quite get their mind around the who, what, when, why, and how I should be doing this, because I think Susan's provided some fantastic thought just on where to get started, and also how you can look at things long term as well. So, Susan, thank you so much for your time. I could probably talk to you for a whole nother hour, but I know you've got plenty of stuff to do. So I will conclude by thank you for sharing your voice with us today.
Thanks so much, David. Loved chatting with you. And yes, happy to help out anyone who wants to get in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an ASA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An ASA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at asa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.